Rain tapped gently against the windows of St. Augustine's Hospice, a quiet facility tucked between the sea cliffs and the sleepy town below. The scent of antiseptic and chamomile tea lingered in the halls, oddly comforting. Nurse Evelyn Hart moved softly from room to room, her steps measured, her smile warm but never invasive. She was the kind of nurse people remembered, not for anything grand or attention-seeking, but for the way she listened, for how she tucked blankets just right, and for how her presence felt like home in a place where goodbyes were whispered more often than hellos. Room 209 had been still all morning. The patient, Mr. Harold Langston, had arrived just 2 days ago, late-stage pancreatic cancer. The kind where comfort was the only option left. He didn't speak much. His eyes, a pale gray, flickered like candlelight in a breeze, as though he were already halfway between here and somewhere else. Evelyn entered quietly, checking his vitals though they didn't matter much anymore. He hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. His breathing had slowed. She adjusted the morphine drip, wiped the corners of his mouth with a cool cloth, and sat beside him. "You're not alone," she said softly, not expecting a reply. His hand twitched, and when she took it, his fingers closed around hers weakly. Evelyn stayed that way for almost an hour, speaking gently about nothing in particular. When his breathing changed, becoming shallower, she rose to call for the attending physician, but he tugged her hand. "Please," he murmured. She paused. "I'm here. No machines just don't go." So she stayed. When he passed 20 minutes later, Evelyn wrapped her arms around his frail shoulders and held him close, letting his head rest against her chest. She hummed something old, something from her childhood, and let her tears fall into his thinning white hair. She didn't notice the woman standing in the doorway until after she had laid him back, hands folded neatly, face peaceful. The woman was dressed in a suit too sharp for a hospice room, holding a leather purse like a verdict. She wore a hospital badge Evelyn didn't recognize. "Your nurse Hart?" the woman asked. Evelyn nodded. "I need to speak with you immediately." Within an hour, Evelyn was sitting across from the hospice director, Dr. Levin, who looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. "You hugged him?" he asked. "Yes," she said, "he was dying." "I'm not questioning your heart, Evelyn, but there are protocols, boundaries. He asked me to stay to hold him. There was no one else." The woman from earlier, Rebecca Grant, apparently from the hospital's legal department, was taking notes like Evelyn had committed a crime. "He had a DNR, no family contact listed, no consent for physical comfort measures of that kind," Rebecca said. "I didn't perform a procedure, I gave him comfort." "You violated policy." It didn't matter what Evelyn said after that. Within a week, she was escorted off the property with a folder in hand and the weight of shame pressing on her chest. She had been a nurse for 14 years. She had comforted dozens through their final moments. But this time, someone had seen her not as a caregiver, but as a liability. She boxed up her apartment slowly, spending more time staring out the window than packing. The phone calls from her sister went unanswered. She couldn't bear to explain. Instead, she watched the sea roll in and tried to believe she'd done the right thing. 3 weeks passed. Then the knock came. Evelyn opened her door to find a man in his early 30s. Sharp suit, rain on his shoulders, a face she couldn't place but felt familiar. He looked at her like someone searching for a trace of something lost. "You're Evelyn Hart." "I am." "My name is Nathan Langston. Harold Langston was my father." She froze. "I know everything," he said. She waited for anger. Instead, his voice broke. "Thank you for not letting him die alone." She gestured for him to come in, but he stayed just outside the door. "I have a proposal," he said, not an apology, not revenge, something else. Evelyn blinked. "What are you talking about?" "I want to offer you a job. I'm no longer a nurse." He smiled faintly. "Not in title maybe, but that's not what I'm offering." Evelyn looked at him then, really looked, and saw the exhaustion in his posture, the grief still clinging to his eyes. And somewhere beneath it, a strange kind of hope. "I want to build something," Nathan said. "Something different, a place where no one dies alone, and I need you to help me do it." Evelyn's heart caught in her chest. "Come with me, just hear me out." So she did. She packed the rest of her life into 2 suitcases and stepped into a car with a stranger who had once been the boy she'd seen in a photo frame on Harold Langston's bedside table. She remembered asking about it. He hadn't spoken then, just touched the glass with a trembling hand. Now that boy was a man with too much money and not enough peace, trying to make sense of the world through something good. And she was no longer a nurse. But maybe she thought she could be something else. The drive to Langston Estate took 4 hours, winding out of the fog-kissed coast into rolling hills dusted with early spring. Nathan barely spoke, his attention flickering between his phone and the road ahead. Evelyn sat quietly in the passenger seat, unsure whether to ask questions or simply observe the way grief changed people. She'd seen all shapes of mourning before, silent, angry, chaotic, numb. But there was something particularly still about Nathan, like he was holding too many words inside him and didn't know which one to let out first. The property wasn't what she expected. She imagined sharp-edged modernity, steel and glass reflecting affluence. Instead, the house was older, worn in places, sprawling in the way family homes once were, long before estates became assets. Ivy curled up brick walls. The garden was unkempt but full of promise. Someone had loved this place once. Nathan led her inside through a heavy wooden door that sighed on its hinges. A dog barked from somewhere deeper in the house, and a moment later, a golden retriever came barreling down the hall, tail wagging like forgiveness itself. "Sorry," Nathan said, kneeling to calm the dog. "That's Penny. She hasn't met many new people lately." Evelyn crouched, her fingers brushing behind Penny's ears. "Hello, sweet girl." Nathan watched her, a question in his eyes that he didn't voice. Instead, he stood and gestured toward the sitting room. A fire was already going. "I brought you here because I'm building something, or I want to. I don't know what it looks like yet, I just know what it is." She sat, hands folded in her lap. "What are you imagining?" He hesitated. "After my father died, I found a letter, written weeks ago before he was transferred to hospice. He never sent it, it was addressed to me. In it, he talked about how he was afraid of dying the way my mother did, cold, alone, in a white room with machines and strangers who wouldn't meet her eyes. He said if there was any mercy left in the world, he hoped someone would simply sit with him when the end came." Evelyn felt her throat tighten. Nathan's voice dropped. "You were that mercy." She didn't know what to say, so she didn't say anything at all. "I've already bought the land, 10 acres outside Ashbrook. It used to be a retreat center. Now it's just empty cabins and a crumbling barn. I want to turn it into a residence for end-of-life care. Hospice, yes, but different, more personal, more human." He walked to the fireplace, hand resting on the mantel. "It won't be run like a hospital, it'll be a home, a place people come to die with dignity, with music, with light, with touch if that's what they want." Evelyn finally found her voice. "And where do I come in?" Nathan turned toward her, eyes steady. "I want you to run it." She blinked. "I'm not a director. I'm not even a nurse anymore, technically." "You're exactly what I need. I don't care about credentials right now. I care about heart. And from everything I've read, everything I've heard, you led with yours." It was overwhelming, flattering, terrifying. "I don't know how to build something like that," she said. "Neither do I. We'll learn together." She looked around the room, the photographs of his father and mother in silver frames, the pile of unopened mail on the hallway table, the dog now asleep by the hearth. This wasn't a man trying to build a brand. This was someone searching for meaning in the ashes of grief. "I want to call it Heart's House," he said. She looked up sharply. "No, that's too much. This isn't about me. It's about what you represent, and the kind of care we both believe in." She stood, suddenly restless, walked to the window. The wind danced through the trees outside, pushing the branches into quiet movement. Her hands trembled slightly, the weight of both honor and fear pressing into her ribs. "Give me 1 week," she said. "Let me see the land, let me understand what this really is." He nodded. "You'll stay here in the guest wing, as long as you need." And so Evelyn stayed. The next morning, they drove to Ashbrook. The retreat center was exactly as Nathan described: broken fences, moss on the rooftops, cabins that smelled like dust and forgotten summers, but the bones were good. There was a peace in the land itself. Trees stood like quiet witnesses. Wildflowers pushed through cracks in the path. A creek ran along the southern edge, its voice soft and persistent. Evelyn walked the grounds alone while Nathan took a call. She stood beneath the frame of what had once been a communal hall, imagined it with long tables, sunlight pouring through clean windows, music humming low from an old speaker. A dog at someone's feet, a nurse adjusting a pillow with reverence, someone breathing their last without fear. She found him sitting on the porch steps of the main cabin. "I'll do it," she said. He looked up, something vulnerable in his expression. "But not alone," she added. "We'll need real nurses, doctors, volunteers, people who understand that the smallest comforts matter most." "I'll fund it all," he said, "and stay out of your way." "No," she said gently, "you'll stay in it. If this place is going to mean something, you have to be part of it, not just the name on a check." He nodded, then offered her his hand. partners. She took it, partners. Over the following weeks, they began. They brought in an architect who specialized in healing spaces. They met with nurses, grief counselors, end-of-life doulas. Evelyn handled the hiring, training, and the thousand tiny decisions that made a place feel less like an institution and more like a home. The cabins were repainted in warm tones. Lavender and rosemary were planted near each doorway. Rocking chairs reappeared on porches. Local artists donated work for the common rooms. A therapy golden retriever, Penny's sister, was adopted. They named the project Heart's House not out of vanity, but out of a belief that care, when rooted in the heart, could be transformative. And still, Evelyn remained unsure of what exactly her role was becoming. She wore no uniform, she made no clinical rounds, but she was there, at every intake, every staff meeting, every bedside conversation where a patient whispered, "Please, don't leave yet." Nathan worked in the background at first, fundraising, networking, paperwork. But then slowly he began to show up in the quiet moments. He played chess with a retired teacher in Cabin 3. He sat beside a musician with ALS and helped organize a final recording session in the woods. Evelyn watched him become something more than a benefactor. He was becoming present. And she was remembering what it meant to live a life shaped not by job titles, but by purpose. Neither of them knew yet how much this place would change them, but something had started. A second chance, not just for those who came to die, but for the two of them who were, in their own ways, learning how to begin again. The first resident of Hart's house arrived in early summer. Her name was Margaret Dean, 83 years old, a retired librarian with metastatic breast cancer. She stepped out of the transport van with a cane in one hand and a thin-lipped smile that tried too hard to mask her fear. Evelyn greeted her with open arms and a calm voice, introducing her to the staff and guiding her to Cabin 4, which had been prepared with floral curtains, a shelf of worn novels, and a small reading lamp by the bed. Margaret paused at the threshold. "No machines," she asked. "Only if you want them," Evelyn said. "This place is yours now." For the next 3 weeks, Margaret read aloud to the nurses in the evenings, baked lemon squares with Evelyn in the communal kitchen, and once convinced Nathan to dance with her beneath the string lights during a Thursday night jazz quartet visit. One night, Evelyn found her on the porch, eyes lifted toward the sky. "Have you ever noticed how loud the stars are when you stop pretending you don't hear them?" Margaret said. Evelyn sat beside her. "Maybe we're just finally listening." When Margaret died, it was with a hand in each of hers, Evelyn on one side, Nathan on the other. She slipped away like a tide returning to sea, her final words a soft thank you for something none of them could quite define. After the funeral, Evelyn went for a walk through the gardens alone, the hem of her dress catching on rosemary and thyme. She crouched beside the freshly planted tree outside Cabin 4, placed there in Margaret's honor, and whispered her goodbye. The residents came slowly at first, a young man with a brain tumor who painted until the very end, a mother of 4 who asked to be surrounded by the laughter of children, prompting a weekly playgroup partnership with the local preschool. A former opera singer who taught the staff to hum lullabies in Italian. And through it all, Evelyn and Nathan moved around each other like two people orbiting something unspoken. They worked well together, too well. Nathan handled what Evelyn couldn't bear to touch, paperwork, permits, fundraising galas she never wanted to attend. And she gave him entry into something he hadn't expected to want, a sense of intimacy not built on tragedy, but on quiet presence. Still, they never named it. Not the way they lingered in conversation after the meetings ended, or how he always brought her tea without asking what kind she liked, or how she remembered to leave a small notebook on his desk each month for his father's journal entries. But there were moments. Late one evening, Evelyn stood in the garden with a trowel in hand, dirt on her palms, planting late-season zinnias while Nathan approached with 2 mugs of tea. "I keep thinking about my dad," he said, handing her one. Evelyn took it, nodding. "How he died, how he asked you to stay." She looked down at the soil, thumb brushing the rim of her cup. "I held him because he needed it," she said, "and because I needed to. Sometimes it's as simple as that." Nathan sat beside her on the low stone wall. The silence stretched, not uncomfortable, but heavy with what hadn't been said. "I think he would have liked it here," he said. Evelyn smiled faintly. He helped build it in a way. They didn't touch, not yet, but their shoulders leaned just slightly, almost enough. Autumn arrived with gold-edged leaves and earlier sunsets. More residents filled the cabins. Some stayed for weeks, others only days. Each one added something: paintings, letters, half-finished crossword puzzles. Evelyn began keeping a drawer in her office filled with these remnants, not as a memorial, but as a quiet reminder of the lives that had passed through. Then came a call from the hospice board that had once dismissed her. Dr. Levin's voice was cautious, respectful even. "We've been watching Hart's house," he said. "What you've built, it's remarkable." Evelyn listened, arms folded tightly across her chest. "We'd like to meet, discuss collaboration, possible expansion. I think you already made your decision about me." He paused. "We were wrong, you were right, and the industry is paying attention." She hung up without making a promise. Nathan found her in the kitchen that night, staring into a pot of simmering soup. "You okay?" he asked. "They want to talk," she said, "the ones who let me go." He didn't answer immediately, just picked up a spoon and stirred the broth. "What are you going to say?" "I don't know." Nathan turned off the burner and looked at her. "You don't owe them anything." "No," she agreed, voice soft, "but maybe I owe it to the ones who come after." The next week, she sat in a conference room across from the same legal advisor who had called her a liability. This time, she wore no scrubs, just a dark green dress and the quiet steadiness of someone who had nothing to prove. Rebecca Grant looked older, tired in a way success couldn't fix. "We want to license the Hart's House model," she said. "Create more locations, training programs. Evelyn, what you've done is extraordinary." Evelyn leaned back in her chair. "I didn't do it alone." "We understand that, of course. We'd like you to lead the expansion team." Evelyn looked past her to the window where rain touched the glass. Somewhere back in Ashbrook, Nathan would be walking the garden paths, perhaps with Penny at his heels, maybe stopping to help a resident pick apples from the tree they'd planted in spring. "I'll think about it," she said. That night back at Hart's house, she found Nathan on the porch of Cabin 1 talking softly with a patient in his last days. They were laughing about something. Evelyn watched from a distance for a moment, how Nathan leaned forward fully present, no trace of the guarded businessman she'd first met. After the patient drifted to sleep, Nathan joined her under the oak tree. "They offered me something today," she said. He nodded. "You'll take it." "I don't know." "Whatever you choose," he said, "you built something here that can't be unbuilt." She looked at him, something deeper stirring now. "Neither can you," she said. He blinked, surprised. "You're not who you were when you walked into that hospice room," she continued. "You stayed and you didn't leave." He stepped closer. "Neither did you." There was no grand moment, no confession or kiss. Just his hand reaching for hers, and her fingers curling into his like a vow. Winter came quietly to Ashbrook, laying frost like lace over the meadows. The air turned still and sharp, and the cabins at Hart's house seemed to hum with an extra kind of warmth. Residents were fewer during the colder months, but those who came brought with them deeper silences, longer stares out snow-misted windows, and stories they were finally ready to share. Evelyn found herself walking slower through the halls, lingering more at bedsides. She'd begun to wear a simple necklace, a gift from one of the patients, a tiny silver heart, nothing showy. She never took it off. Nathan had grown more present than ever. He spent his mornings in the main house's study-turned office, his afternoons wandering the grounds with a thermos of coffee in one hand and Penny's leash in the other. He had a way of listening now that Evelyn admired, quiet, unhurried, the kind that made people want to keep talking. One day in early January, Evelyn returned from a morning visit to the local clinic with fresh syringes and supplies to find a new face at the front desk. A young man, early 20s, clean-shaven, wide-eyed. He stood quickly when she entered. "Are you Evelyn Hart?" "I am. You must be Aaron." Nathan had mentioned him, a social work student from the university, assigned here for his final internship. He had no medical experience, but his professors said he led with gentleness. "I just finished orientation with Carla," he said. "This place is not what I expected." Evelyn smiled. Most people feel that way. She gave him a tour, letting him ask questions, some hesitant, others unusually insightful. As they passed the central kitchen, Aaron paused to read a quote framed above the stove. "Care is not a service, it's a relationship." "Is that yours?" he asked. "No," she said. "It came from one of our first patients, but we live by it." By the end of the week, Aaron had already learned to brew tea just the way Mrs. Llewellyn liked it, and how to tell when Jack in Cabin 7 was nearing one of his quiet spells. He began keeping a notebook full of residents' favorite songs so he could learn the lyrics by heart. Evelyn watched him from a distance sometimes, wondering if this was what legacy looked like, not awards or buildings, but small kindnesses passed down and carried forward. But even as the house thrived, a quiet pressure built in Evelyn's chest. The offer from the hospice board remained open. They called every 2 weeks, polite, patient, dangling promises of nationwide impact. The idea of shaping care on a broader scale had its appeal. She could create standards, teach philosophy, inspire better systems. But to do so, she'd have to leave Hart's house behind, at least in the way she lived within it now. One evening she sat beside Nathan on the porch swing, the air cold but still, Penny curled at their feet. "They've asked again," she said, not needing to explain who they were. Nathan didn't respond right away. He looked out at the gardens, now sleeping beneath the snow. "What do you want?" he asked gently. She leaned into the back of the swing, eyes to the sky. "I want people to stop dying the way they used to, afraid, alone, invisible. I want the world to learn what we've learned here." "Then maybe it's time," he said, though his voice betrayed something he didn't name. "I'm afraid to go," she admitted. "And I'm afraid to let you," he said, "but I won't stand in your way." She turned toward him. "Would you come with me?" Nathan hesitated. "You're asking if I'd leave Hart's house." "I'm asking if we could build something together somewhere else, something bigger." He looked at her then, really looked, and she could see the war in him, between duty and desire, between grief and hope. "I can't walk away from this place," he said, "but I can help you build out there too. I'll fund it, travel with you, just promise me you'll still come home here." It struck her he had said home. She nodded slowly, heart aching in that beautiful way it does when something is shifting. "Okay," she said, "we'll try." They launched the initiative 2 months later, the Heart Project, a nonprofit dedicated to redesigning end-of-life care across the country, training programs, resource centers, small residential spaces modeled after Hart's house. Evelyn began traveling twice a month, meeting with local leaders, speaking at conferences, consulting with facilities aching for change but unsure how to begin. Back home, Nathan kept Hart's house steady. He never tried to take her place. Instead, he stepped into his own, mentoring new volunteers, building relationships with families, even starting a monthly grief writing group in the sunroom. Their relationship deepened in the spaces between. A slow dance in the kitchen after a long day. Letters slipped into her suitcase before a trip. The way he always saved her the last slice of blackberry pie. They didn't need declarations, what they had was lived. But then in late March, Evelyn received a call she hadn't expected. Dr. Levin had died. It was a heart attack, sudden and swift. He'd been hiking alone when it happened. The hospice where she once worked, where she had been let go without ceremony, reached out to ask if she would speak at his memorial. She said yes. Nathan offered to go with her, but she declined. "I need to do this alone," she said. The chapel was small, quiet, with a modest gathering of colleagues and family. Evelyn stood at the podium, her fingers wrapped tightly around her notes. "I worked under Dr. Levin for years," she began. "He taught me much about discipline, structure, policy, but what I remember most is not how we parted, but what came after." She paused. "I was fired for hugging a man as he died. That moment ended my career, or so I thought, but it also began everything that followed. And I know now that sometimes, in caring for others, we cross boundaries not out of recklessness but out of love. Dr. Levin didn't see that then, but he reached out months before his death to say he did now, and that matters." She stepped down to silence, not applause, just the weight of understanding. When she returned to Hart's house that evening, Nathan was waiting on the porch, 2 mugs of tea in his hands. "Tell me everything," he said. She sat beside him and rested her head on his shoulder. The lights inside glowed warm against the snow. A song played faintly from someone's radio, something old, full of longing. "I think I finally let go," she whispered. And in the quiet that followed, she realized it was true. Spring came in slow ripples across Ashbrook, softening the hard lines of winter until the ground thawed and green pushed through the gray. The gardens bloomed early this year. Lavender opened first, followed by tulips planted by a young resident who had passed before he could see them. Evelyn stood at the edge of the flower beds one morning, her hands still buried in earth, thinking about time. How it never gave what we asked, but sometimes, if we paid attention, it gave what we needed. Hart's house was full again. In cabin 2, a retired chef was teaching a nurse how to make coq au vin from a hospital bed. In cabin 6, a father in his 40s read bedtime stories into a recorder for his daughters, his voice steady even as his body faltered. Evelyn moved between these rooms like she always had, not as a nurse anymore, not officially, but as something older, quieter, a steward of peace, a witness. The Heart Project had grown faster than anyone expected. With Nathan's funding and Evelyn's heart at the center, 3 new residences had opened across the country, each one modeled in spirit after the original, intimate, warm, with music in the halls and gardens outside every window. Evelyn traveled less now, not because she didn't care, but because she'd come to understand something truer: the work would never be finished. But it didn't need to be finished to be beautiful. One afternoon, as sunlight pooled across the main room's wooden floor, Evelyn found a letter tucked beneath her teacup. She recognized Nathan's handwriting before she opened it. "You told me once that we don't choose when people leave. We only choose how to stay with them while they're here. I never told you this, but I think I stayed for you." She folded the letter gently, her heart still and full. That evening after dinner, she found him in the orchard. The apple trees had blossomed, their pale flowers drifting like quiet snow around his shoulders. He was sitting on the old bench beneath the oldest tree, eyes closed, breathing in the new season. She sat beside him without a word. "I've been thinking," he said, "about the future." She smiled, not looking at him. "Me too. I don't want to just walk beside you through this work. I want to walk with you through whatever's next, not as your business partner." She turned, but he wasn't looking at her. He was watching a young volunteer help an elderly resident scatter birdseed across the lawn, both of them laughing softly, hunched toward each other like conspirators. "I want a life with you, Evelyn," he said. "Not just this place, a home, a family in whatever form that takes." She said nothing for a long moment, not because she didn't know the answer, but because she wanted to feel the weight of it, the rightness. Then she reached for his hand and laced her fingers through his. "You already are my home," she said. They married in late summer beneath the willow tree in the eastern corner of the property, the same tree where Margaret Dean used to sit and read aloud to anyone who would listen. The ceremony was small: residents, staff, friends who had come to help and stayed long enough to be family. There were no tuxedos, no lace veils. Just linen, laughter, and flowers picked fresh from the garden. Carla read a blessing. Aaron, now a full-time social worker, cried through most of his toast. Penny wore a floral collar and sat patiently at Nathan's feet. They danced on the grass, barefoot, to a record that crackled softly under the weight of time. And when Evelyn rested her head against Nathan's shoulder, she felt not the thrill of something new, but the safety of something earned. Years passed. Hart's house never became a chain. Evelyn refused it, but it did become a symbol. Nurses came from all over to learn not just technique, but presence. Families who once grieved in its rooms came back to volunteer, cook, sit at bedsides for those who had no one else. And Evelyn, now older, her hair streaked with silver and her hands lined with grace, remained at the center, still greeting new residents at the door, still whispering goodbyes when the time came. One late autumn afternoon, she stood at the edge of the orchard again, watching wind move through the branches. Nathan was farther down the path, walking beside a resident in a wheelchair, their silhouettes golden in the last light of day. Evelyn closed her eyes. She thought of the man whose hand she once held in a hospice bed, the man who had died with his head resting against her shoulder, the man whose passing had taken her career but given her everything else. She thought of how sometimes love didn't enter as a promise or a spark, but as a single act of mercy, a hug in a quiet room that grew into a life. And as the sun dipped behind the trees, Evelyn smiled. She had not been fired that day. She had been set free.